Welcome to Conversations in Science, hosted by the Buffalo Museum of Science. My name is Gabrielle Graham, and I am the Community Partnerships and Adult Programs Manager for the Buffalo Museum of Science. This is going to be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube, so you can share this with friends and family. We ask that you stay on mute so that we can preserve sound quality. Feel free to ask questions using the chat throughout the program, and we will relay those to our speaker. If you would like to ask questions anonymously, you can also just message the hosts, and that will go to the speaker and myself. Originally, these programs were held in person at the museum, but we are so thrilled that with the new ways of the world, we're able to bring it to you through Zoom. This also allows us to bring in speakers that we would not normally have for the museum. So it is a true delight that I am able to welcome Charlie King in. Just a little bit about Charlie in a second. But we really thank all of our audiences, our donors, and the people who hold museum memberships, because it's that support that allows us to continue our educational programs at the Buffalo Museum of Science and Tift Nature Preserve. So thank you very much to our members and to our donors. So I will now introduce Charlie King. Charlie is coming to us from Texas, so it's a little bit of a journey that we wouldn't normally take on for an hour-long program, but again, I'm just so thrilled to have Charlie with us today. Charlie King is a geoscientist who has specialized in subsurface investigations throughout their career. While an undergraduate at Florida State University, they spent 4 months in Antarctica working on the ANDRILL project. Since then, they have worked on hydrogeologic investigations in Arizona, Argentina, and at Colorado State University, where they earned their Masters of Science. They have also worked on hydrogeologic and energy development projects in Wyoming, Texas, and North Dakota. And I do believe, Charlie, you've just gotten back from North Dakota as well, isn't that right?
Yes, I was there last week, got down to -17 before we left and came back.
-17 makes the Buffalo weather feel very balmy. So thank you for that reminder that it could be worse. And with that, we will turn it over to Charlie for the presentation.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see the presentation. Today, I've got it broken up into 3 different sections so we can talk about different things. So we're going to talk about what it's like to actually get to Antarctica and live on base at McMurdo Station. Then we'll get into the survival training that you have to take if you're going to leave the base, and what life is like when you're actually off station. And last, I'm just going to talk about specifically what it was like to be a scientist on the ANDRILL project, because that was what most of my time down there was truly devoted to.
I just want to do a quick shout out here too, that in the museum right now, we've opened Antarctic dinosaurs, and the ANDRILL project is featured on one of the panels in the recap section about other science going on in Antarctica. So if you'd like to see some of that in person, we've got a connection with the museum. And for those of you on the call here who are our docents for the museum and looking to pick up additional information, just wanted to point that out. And thank you very much for letting me interrupt you there, Charlie.
No, that was perfect, because you reminded me to tell the audience another thing. I am very used to presenting to technical audiences. It's been a long time since I presented to a group of people who weren't geologists working on the project I was already working on. So Gabrielle's going to rein me in if I get too technical or go too fast on the subject. And also, I'm going to try to slow myself down and only mention a few things per slide so that it's more of a conversation and we have time to take questions as we go along.
I'm very thankful for Charlie to be here, because it was a great reminder that these are in fact conversations not only to train the public to feel more competent and engaged in asking science questions, but to remind scientists how to talk to the general public. So we are all doing Charlie a great service here today. And so really make the most of it. We're going to give her a run for her money.
Yeah, you definitely are doing a service. The further you get along in your career, the more you unlearn some basic communication skills. So bear with me here and feel free to ask questions if you ever need clarification. So to start us off, we're going to talk about getting to Antarctica and life on base. So just some basic questions of why I was there, how I got there, and what it was actually like to arrive. So the reason I was there is I did my undergraduate at Florida State, like Gabrielle said, and I was lucky enough that the Antarctic Marine Geology Research Facility was based on campus at Florida State from 1963 all the way up until 2018. And so I worked there for 2 years during my undergraduate degree. And because I was trained to curate core in that facility, we got invited to go down to Antarctica for a core acquisition project. So it was very exciting. It was me and another undergraduate student who also worked at the facility, a grad student who had some work that was very similar to what we were looking at, and then the head curator and assistant curator. So we all went down as a curatorial team on the info project. This slide just shows a picture of the facility. It's basically, you had 6,000 square feet of refrigerated core space. It was refrigerated because you want to keep the core in as close to the conditions that you acquired them in. What you're seeing on that picture is a bunch of plastic tubes, and each of those are full of core. There's about 20,000 liters of marine geologic sediment core stored in the facility at the time that I worked there. It was a teaching facility, so we gave tours to students and faculty, but a primary purpose for being there was to lay out the core and sample it for visiting scientists, because people are still requesting samples from the ones that were acquired back in the late 50s. So because we were going down to one of the American bases, the United States has 3 bases on Antarctica. We've got Accommodation Station, South Pole Station, and McMurdo Station, where I went.
Can you just point out McMurdo with your cursor?
Absolutely. So you're going to see me look at my other screen, because that's actually where the slides are. That's the South Pole in Palmer. McMurdo Station is right here, and it's on Ross Island on the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf, facing towards the Southern Ocean. So because it's a United States base, you have to go through the United States Antarctic Program in order to get down there. They coordinate all of your travel, which initially is commercial flights to Los Angeles and then to Christchurch. In Christchurch, you switch over to flying with the United States Air Force, and they take you down to the ice. The other big part of coordinating people going down there is getting your medical clearance. So it actually takes 8 weeks to get medically cleared and your dental clearance to be allowed to go to the continent. They force you to get your basic physicals. You have to get EKGs, blood work. You have to be fully vaccinated for everything, even including flu vaccines. And then you have to address any issues that they do find in your workup. And the reason for this is there are no doctors down there to help you out if you do have a crisis. So they just have to make sure that all of your medical conditions are manageable without a doctor for a long period of time. So once you arrive in Christchurch, New Zealand, this is where you switch from flying commercial to actually flying with the U.S. Air Force. It's also where they have a huge clothing distribution center, and they get you outfitted before you go down. So that list of clothing in the top of the slide is actually the entire list of everything they make you pack. You have to have a version of each one of those items, and everything in bold on that list you have to actually wear onto the aircraft. And that's because there's not enough room on the aircraft for everybody to get dressed on the way down, and you must be wearing it as you exit it once you arrive in Antarctica. So you can see a bunch of people were just kind of milling around with their coats off waiting to get on. Are there any questions about that part so far?
Do you have an allotment? Like, are you allowed to take all the clothes that you feel like you need, or do they go, whoa, 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 that's enough?
You have to take everything on that list, and they give you a big orange duffel bag to hold it in. And then you can have one personal bag, which is the size of a normal carry-on, that you can have your own normal day-to-day clothes and books and whatever else you want to bring down. I mean, this was before the age of Nintendo and Netflix. You definitely need to bring a little bit of entertainment with you.
Some physical media entertainment from the days of yore.
Yeah. I was actually lucky too because I was on a scientific project. We shipped down crates of material ahead of time because our project required a lot of equipment. And so if we had a little bit of extra room in the crate, we were able to throw in like a lamp, a fan for our room, and things like that, which people who are just flying down don't necessarily get to have. When you're flying down, we took a C-17 to the ice. That was what dropped us off at McMurdo Station. Very different from being in a commercial aircraft. You can see the guts of the plane. Everybody's kind of crammed in. You actually have more leg room than on a commercial flight, but it's packed with your bags. Your bags are just sitting right in front of you in between your legs. The cargo is out in the open behind you underneath web netting. And there were two windows in the plane that everybody had to take turns to look out. So this is a picture of my first glimpse of the continent out of that tiny little window.
Wait, only there are two windows, not there are two windows by every seat. There are two, count them, 1, 2. And how many people are on the plane?
Yeah, there are probably around 50 people on the plane, would be my guess.
That's a lot of some good strategizing to get your 2 minutes looking out the window.
Yeah. A lot of people who do go to Antarctica, and that's both the science support staff and people going down scientific projects, they do this over and over again. People who work on Antarctic research typically get to go to the ice sometimes once a year, sometimes every few years. Science support staff start to enjoy the lifestyle and they'll come back for multiple contracts. And so not everybody really cared about looking out the window.
So if you've, I'm going to make an assumption because we know each other, that you've traveled elsewhere in the world and not just between Florida, Texas, the states that we mentioned, and Antarctica. Was flying over the ice like anything else that you had seen on the planet so far? Or is it pretty, can you compare it to anything or no, not really?
Yeah, it's not really comparable to anything. I suppose the desert would be the only thing that it'd be close to. And truly, Antarctica is a desert. It's just a desert covered in snow. It's the driest place on Earth as well as being the coldest. But yeah, it's very different.
That's very cool. These pictures are beautiful, as someone has said in the chat.
Glad you're enjoying them. So when we landed down on the ice, the most shocking part for me was exiting the plane. I stepped up to the doorway, and my first thought was, this isn't that bad. Actually, I don't feel that cold. Well, it turns out they were blowing hot air down into the doorway. And when you take that next step out onto the first stair leading down to the ice, all of a sudden it was -50. The wind was howling sideways, and as a Floridian, I had never experienced anything like that before. So it was very shocking, and I remember being surprised that we were allowed to be outside.
So the standing in the door, not so bad. Stepping, real bad.
Yeah, getting actually out of the aircraft is when it hits you. So this was a fairly low visibility day when we landed. It was -50 at the time. There was fairly good wind. You can see we had some camera crews on site. There were a few documentaries that were being filmed while we were down there. I think Warner Herzog was down there, and PBS was filming their special Secrets Beneath the Ice, which does cover the ANDRILL project. So you can see that's why there's a sound boom in the foreground. But when you look towards the background, that's McMurdo Station off in the distance to the left. And on the right-hand side is Ob Hill. I'm pointing that out because it's a major landmark, and it's a popular place to go hiking to look out over the ice and over the base.
That is really cool. It looks cold. I mean, it looks pretty cold outside in Buffalo sometimes, but that looks cold. And this is huge. What have we got here?
So now we've hiked up to the top of Ob Hill, and we're looking down onto McMurdo Station. You can see out across the sea ice, the mainland of Antarctica is off to the top left, and the edge of the sea ice is off to the top right. And so that's where the edge of the sea ice was in October when we got there. That's the beginning of springtime for Antarctica. And as the season progressed and we got into summer in January and February, the ice melts all the way back to base. And this is actually where ships pull in.
Can you just show us,
load it onto
because
the
we can
cargo.
see your cursor, if you show us the horizon line where the sea ice is in the spring,
That's
Yep.
where the sea ice is. It's
way up
just
at top.
that blurry line between sky and ice. And then there's the mainland of Antarctica. You can see some of the transantarctic mountains across the sea ice. And then here is where the ships pull in
Wow.
the summer after it's melted back.
What a difference.
Yeah, and the sea ice is very thick because that's what we landed on. So you can see, skip ahead here, that is where the spring runway is, where the C-17 landed. They took us down past Scott's Hut. So that was one of the early 1900s expeditions, was run by Scott. They passed away in 1912, but you can still see some of their research huts and waypoints where they were stashing equipment. Then they drove us up past the summer pier and dropped us off at post office.
And you can see more of the information about Scott's Hut and that expedition and the fossils that they were retrieving in the Antarctic dinosaurs exhibit as well.
Yeah. There were 3 historic explorers that were racing to the South Pole at the same time. It was Scott, Shackleton, and I never remember the third.
They didn't win, so
yeah,
we don't
no,
yeah,
they didn't win. Scott got there first, but his whole crew actually died because they had collected too many rock samples and it weighed down their sleds. And they weren't able to make it back to their food cache in time, unfortunately. But he was a wonderful geologist that could one get up his rocks.
And we've got our post office, which again, so we're oh, Amundsen is the name. Thanks very much, Matt. Yes. As we kind of mentioned before, so remind us of the year that you were in Antarctica.
I arrived October of 2006 and left in January of 2007.
So for those of the younger crowd, in 2006, the internet was not the quick, stable presence that it is today. There really would have been absolutely no way to do a program like this, streaming to someone in Antarctica, which we are not doing today. Charlie is in Texas. But then also all entertainment media was not available online. And so the post office, yeah, what sort of things would you get at the post office, Charlie?
Yeah, we had old-fashioned fun. A friend of mine sent me a CD while I was down there so I could listen to some new music. I had some care packages from my mom. I think she sent me a package of instant grits and maybe some cookies or something. But for the most part, it was letters. It's just really fun to write letters back and forth with people. They're always interested to hear about what was going on in the house. We did have some access to the internet. There were computers in the central headquarters that we could take turns using. It was mainly just good for email. The connection is extremely slow. It's just a satellite connection. And then they did have one streaming interaction while we were down there. It was through the San Francisco Exploratorium. But if you go back and watch that YouTube video, it was very, very choppy because it's just not, you don't have that kind of connection.
That's cool. Very cool. All right, what else have we got on this map?
All right, so after that, we made our way towards the Beaker dorms. Beakers are what everyone else calls the scientists down there. So that's where the scientists usually hung out mainly for sleeping. Nobody really spends a lot of time by themselves down here. You get pretty lonely. We also spent most of our time in Prairie Labs. So that's that 3-tiered building right here. The ANDRILL project took up the entire 2nd tier, and my core viewing room that I worked in all day was in this back corner here. And I'm also pointing out the heart of the base. That's this headquarters building. That's where there was an internet terminal and a couple of computers that you could hook up to. There was the only ATM on base. They also have the galley, so that's your kitchens and dining space where we had all of our meals. There was a small market where you could buy junk food, extra socks, that kind of thing. And then it also had dormitories. So the dormitories were full year round, but in the wintertime, when the population of base drops from about 1,500 people to 150 people, everyone has to sleep in the headquarters building. And that's because sometimes the conditions get so dangerous that you can't even travel in between buildings, and they don't want anybody to get stranded, especially away from the food. So,
Yeah, so much like snowstorms here, you kind of get everyone together in the building that has the kitchen, and try not to go outside. Can you give us a 50-cent tour or a penny tour of the rest of the base?
absolutely. So we've got Air Force Base, some more support staff dorms for the summertime. There were a lot of other things you find in a small town. So you have vehicle maintenance stations, so basically a car mechanic shop. There was field storage. We had a carpentry workshop, medical center. It was just kind of basic. They could take care of you if you got a boo-boo or something, and they could take x-rays, but that's about as advanced as they could help you out. We had a supply center in case you did need a replacement for any of your cold weather gear, and a helicopter hanger pads for fun. We had a coffee house, a gym, and a chapel. There was also a burger bar where you could hang out after shift. And all the way across the base was a greenhouse, and that was where I like to spend my time.
Excellent. It really is like a little town. Yeah.
Yep. So this is what the dorms were like for the beakers, at least. It was 2 to a room. We had a twin bed for each person, a nightstand and a wardrobe, and that was it. We were very lucky because I was on day shift and my cohort, Kelly, was on night shift, so we never had to share the room at the same time. A lot of the science support staff, sometimes they're 4 beds to a room, they might all be on the same shift. So they would actually hang bed sheets in between their beds to create somewhat of privacy for themselves. We were also lucky to have a window.
Ooh. You really have been pampered on your trip.
Yeah, the scientists do get kind of some better accommodations, which, it's just one of those situations where you're down there for a short period of time, and so they try to take care of you.
Yeah.
This is
This
what the
looks
galleys
tasty.
were like. So you would feed yourself buffet style. You'd pick up your blue tray and walk around and grab what food you wanted. The people who worked in the galley were magicians. Almost all of the food that was served had been frozen for at least a year. They had a backlog of supplies that was always on base, and it never tasted like frozen food. They did wonderful work with it. Very economical as well. You'd find the leftover vegetables from the night before worked into a pot pie or casserole.
We have a question in the chat. Did you ski down Ob Mountain to get back to base faster?
No, Ob Mountain is covered in pretty jagged volcanic rock, so yeah, it would have been painful. I accidentally skied down one of those jagged volcanic rock hills on my knees, and I paid for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, not a lot of skiing or sledding down there.
That's right, because it is, yeah. Antarctica is made of volcanic formations, is that right?
The Ross Island is. So
Ross Island is a
Island
volcanic island.
Yeah, it was formed by 4 different volcanoes, and one of them is actually still active, so you can see it smoking in the background in some pictures.
Cool. This doesn't look like Antarctica.
No, this is the greenhouse. This was where I spent a lot of my free time, because something you don't realize about being in a place like Antarctica is there aren't any natural smells outside. The ground is volcanic rock. There's no soil or organic component. You've got it covered in ice, so there's no plants or anything like that to give off smells. So the only thing you smell on base typically is body odor and diesel. And the greenhouse was a really nice break from that. So you could go in, surround yourself with living things, and smell the edible dandelions and that sort of thing. So
like an eternal box of spring.
yeah. So everything in the greenhouse was edible. It was also all hydroponic. You're not allowed to bring any soil to the continent. They don't want to have any issues with contamination. So you could go there. I would often volunteer or just hang out in a hammock over the lettuce or that cozy chair under the Swiss chard. And because everybody's stuck on base for such a long period of time, there's a lot of social outings. So there was that burger bar and coffee house you could hang out at, and about once a month, either the United States base or the nearby New Zealand base would throw a costume party for everybody to go enjoy. We also had a chili cook-off, which was a lot of fun. And you play some pretty basic games because, like we said earlier, there's not a lot of technology to keep yourself entertained. You do it the old-fashioned way, and you just form quick and strong friendships with other people on base.
It looks like a real kind of summer camp mentality from the time, in the 90s when I would go to summer camp. Very cool.
Yeah, it definitely is. So at this point, we can pause for any other questions that have come up about living on McMurdo Station.
Yeah, so Matt asked, do they use special lights inside the greenhouse that you know of? I mean, I know you're not a biologist, but do you know what types of bulbs they were, or?
I know they were UV lights. That's about as detailed of an answer as I can give.
Fair enough. We all have our niches. Yeah, but it needs to be putting off something more than an LED, because an LED, you can't grow a plant with an LED.
No, they were definitely grow lights, and also you have to consider the time of year. We were here during the summer, so it was 24-hour daylight. You could think, oh, you could just use natural light, but that greenhouse was a really important source of fresh vegetables for the people who stay there during the winter when it's 24-hour darkness, and so you have to have the artificial light for the.
Yeah, so that leads into Sandy's question. How much daylight did you have? And that was all of it, all of the daylight, all of the time? Did the sun ever set, or did the light seem to change much?
No, it didn't. The sun just kind of, so if this was the horizon, the sun would just kind of bob around it all the time. So it was never above you, and it was never below the horizon. It was just always kind of there, and it would just go in circles around the different side of the base, which was very strange, especially if you were up late. So if you were hanging out with your friends, and then you go outside because you're like, oh, I'm tired, I need to go back to my dorm, and you go outside, the sun's right in your face. Like, oh gosh, it's 12 o'clock at night. So it was really disorienting.
And then our last question is, what is that, a snowball on the top of the hill, or what is that in our picture that we're looking at here?
I believe it's housing for some of the communications antennas.
Oh, okay, to keep antennas from breaking off in the wind, or just being out in the elements. It's better to be covered than not. Very cool. All right, let's keep going. So we're at the halfway mark right now. So we want to see, we've got some survival training, and then we also have the scientific work. Thank you very much. Here we are.
And this is probably the most fun section. Survival training was fun. They call it snow school. You have to take it if you are going to leave McMurdo Station and go onto an excursion that's far from base. Before we even loaded up, they started giving us our training as far as telling us we were not allowed to wear anything cotton. That includes jeans, because cotton is a terrible insulator, especially if it gets wet. We also got warned that it was really important to stay hydrated. This is the driest place on Earth, and people would sometimes avoid drinking water because you don't want to have to strip off all your clothes to go to the bathroom. But really, that fear could get you in a lot more trouble because holding fluid in your bladder is kind of stealing heat from your body. But getting dehydrated could also put you in a lot of health troubles as well.
Good to know.
You have to stay fully hydrated. Another thing they teach you is to always keep food on you. And when I say on you, I mean literally. You're supposed to store sandwiches and bars of chocolate in the inside of your coat. And that's so that you can constantly eat. You're burning a lot of more calories than normal just to keep your body warm. So it's important to keep your metabolism going. And if you don't store the food inside of your coat, it's going to freeze solid and you're not going to be able to eat it. So when we did our survival school, I think it was around -40 to -30 at the time that I was out there.
Wow.
You build a snow wall to protect yourself from the wind. So the snow wall goes all the way around the site where everybody's going to lay their tents out. So it blocks wind so that you can actually have a fire and cook your dinner. It also provides a physical barrier in case visibility goes down so you don't accidentally wander out of the tent site.
So like in whiteout conditions, so people don't wander away, it's also a fence to keep the scientists all together.
Yeah, like a livestock corral.
Yeah.
There were a few different sleeping options, and you got to pick your own. The modern mountaineering tents were popular with the people who had done this several times before because they're very well constructed. Scott tents are also popular, and you'll see people who live in long-term off-base campsites usually sleep in Scott tents. And that's because they're tall enough that you can stand up in. So if you're trapped inside of it for multiple days because of bad weather, you can actually stretch out a little bit. But they're also big enough that you can burn a small fire inside of them in order to cook your food without having to go outside. Snow graves were one option that you could use. I chose a frenzy. So you load up a bunch of bags into a pile, you pack snow on top of it, and then you pull the bags out from under it so that you have a hollow dome of compressed snow. And then
So
you
these are the bags on the side, on the top left picture. We've got the bags, and then you mounded that up and then just pulled them right back out.
And then you dig your tunnel last, and that forms a cold sink so that you can fit about 3 or 4 people inside the Quincy. You're all sleeping in there, and it traps your body heat in that dome. And so you're able to keep each other warm a lot more effectively. Also, because snow only gets down to 32 degrees, you're not fighting as low of a temperature as it actually is outside. So your body's only trying to fight that 32 degrees, not in the
Oh, I always thought about it as like a lunchbox, but really, no, yeah, you're protecting yourself from the lower temperatures than freezing. So being at freezing is a lot, I mean, it's 70 degrees warmer than negative 40 below. My math is not super great, but I'm pretty sure that's close.
Yeah, it's close. But this dinner. So this is a picture of day 2, just waking up inside of my Quincy. The view of that was where I slept, and we're looking down at the tunnel that I have to crawl out of to get back out. Sorry, taking a sip of my water there.
No, good.
And
important to stay hydrated.
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the last photos I have of survival school. Within a couple of hours of taking it, I succumbed to moderate hypothermia and had to be taken into the instructor's hut to warm back up.
Yeah, no joke. Coming from the state of Florida and going to Antarctica is quite the temperature shock for your body, no matter how much training you go through.
Yeah, and it was a pretty common thing to happen to people who were down there for their first year or two. You don't know all the tricks, and you also don't know what to look out for in yourself. You really rely on others to be watching you and making sure that you're behaving normally. When you start to get hypothermia, you don't realize it's happening. You just know you're cold and you think everybody else is cold too. But other people will notice that you're starting to stumble a little bit, your speech will become slurred, and you're not making sense, and that's usually a pretty bad sign when you get somebody warmed up.
Yeah, definitely. Many more of my neighbors are familiar with hypothermia now that I live in Buffalo versus the time that I lived in Florida. Sandy wanted to know, what is the kind of average temperature that you experienced over the summer there?
So it was negative 50 when I arrived, and it was about positive 20 by the time I left. So I didn't leave all the way at the end of summer. It was probably about the peak of summer. So the average is somewhere around negative 20 now.
Oof.
You get used to it though. Those days it actually did get above freezing, or well, not, I never got above freezing, but the days it got above 0 started to feel like t-shirt weather.
Yeah, that's tough. All right, let's get out of the snow.
All right. So here's a map of Ross Island. Like we said, it's a volcanic island. Mount Erebus is the one that's still active. I'm going to point out on this map, we've got 3 different colors of blue for the ocean that's surrounding the island. And that's because the light blue color is open ocean, so nothing is frozen. The medium blue color is the sea ice, so that means it's frozen in the wintertime and in early spring, but by the height of summer, all of that is melted away. And then the grayish blue color is the permanent ice shelf, so that's present year-round. And you can see where McMurdo Station is on the end of that peninsula. It's surrounded by sea ice, and the ice shelf is actually doesn't start until you get back to this New Zealand base called Scott Base.
Very cool.
We would get to visit Scott Base because it was the closest other research station near us, and they had a much lower population. So they would get down to 14 people in the winter, and in the summertime they only had a little bit more than that, I think about twice that amount. And so they invited us over every Thursday night for American night, and it was just a chance for them to get to see new faces and get a little bit more socialization. They also threw some of the costume parties, so this is a picture from the skirt party that they had.
Yeah, definitely. It really is a multinational endeavor down there, not only with, the bases in proximity, but you mentioned, and maybe you'll talk about this more in the science section, that there were scientists from all different nation states that were represented on the work at McMurdo, and then also at the other, there are many, many bases around Antarctica, and we've just been talking about two so far.
Yeah, ANDRILL, the project I was on, was a multinational team, and so we had members of our group from Italy, Germany, United States, and New Zealand. It was really fun, just getting to meet all kinds of new people. These are pictures of the pressure ridges. So, I showed you that the ice shelf starts back at Scott Base. So where the sea ice and the ice shelf kind of butt up against each other, you get these really unique ice formations where the ice is just kind of buckled and pushed up and then melted and refreezed into an interesting landscape.
We had a quick question from Hazel about when you were sleeping in the snow. When you crawled out of the hole, was it covered with snow? Like, did it snow a lot, or was there just a lot of snow on the ground? Did it snow frequently, or was there just snow on the ground?
There was just a lot of snow on the ground at the time. It didn't snow frequently while I was down there. It was
Because you were there in the summertime.
Yeah, I was there in the summertime. We didn't have a lot of storms. It's just kind of luck of the draw. You get storms that roll through.
Well, it's always nice when you don't have to dig yourself out.
Yeah, they have three weather conditions in Antarctica. Condition 3, it means everything is good and you're free to move around as normal. Condition 2 means the weather's starting to get bad, so it's probably snowing, visibility is decreased, so you're only allowed to leave base if it's absolutely crucial. And condition 1 is whiteout conditions. You're not allowed to even travel in between buildings unless you have a cable line that's been stretched between the buildings that you can pull yourself along.
Wow. We have another question from Cindy. Was it very windy when you were there?
Yeah, it would often get fairly windy. Good gusts up, usually around 10 miles an hour, but sometimes it would get up to like 30.
10 to 30.
That's part of the weather conditions. When it gets extremely windy, that's when the weather conditions start to deteriorate and you need to stay inside.
So with the level 2, yeah. Good, thank you. Now, who are these little suckers?
So Scott Base had a seal colony nearby. These are Weddell seals, and they spend their time just laying out in the sun and sleeping on top of the ice. And the Antarctic Treaty states that you are not allowed to disrupt the animals. You're not allowed to do anything that would change their behavior from what they normally do. So that means you can get as close as you want to these guys to take pictures, as long as you're not bothering them. If they so much as look at you, you have to back off and give them away, get away and give them their space. Generally, though, they don't care that you're there. They don't have any natural land predators in Antarctica, and so they were very unconcerned with our presence.
What kind of seals were these?
Weddell seals. That's Weddell, I think.
Weddell. Very cool.
I'm not a great speller, so.
It starts with a W, and there are seals in Antarctica, and that's enough for us to do our research.
This is a view of the top of Odd Hill, just looking out to the continent, so you can see the Transantarctic Mountains across the way, and this was a popular hiking spot. If you did go out on a hiking trail, you had to check out with the station manager. You had to check a radio out, so they had to know what route you were taking. You had a radio, and you had at least one other person with you. You were never allowed to leave base alone. You can see here there's some trails and roadways out here. They actually did upkeep some cross-country skiing trails. that went in between McMurdo Station and Base for the spring months.
We had a question earlier about vehicles. So cross-country skis were used for a leisure move, and then do you see what other types of vehicles would be used to move between spots in the field and the base?
There were a variety of vehicles. Some had, like Ivan the Terrabus that we saw in that picture for Scott Base, was just a really large tank-like bus with huge snow tires on it. That would be used to just take up the roadways that were established in between McMurdo Station and Scott Base. If you were leaving the station and traveling over the sea ice or the ice shelf, you generally had a tracked vehicle, so it actually had like tank tracks on.
Like,
So I'll
like
show you a picture of
tank
one
treads.
of those in the next section.
And then one more question about Ob Hill. How long did it take to get to the top of Ob Hill?
It wasn't too bad of a hike. It was only about 45 minutes from what I recall.
Very pleasant, 45-minute hike, not bad.
Yeah. There was a much longer hike back behind the station that would take you up the peninsula farther. That was really fun. And so they actually had these survival pods out here.
Oh, this red
out.
thing. Ooh.
Yeah. In case the weather condition changed while you were out there, you could hunker down inside the pod until things improved or something to come and get you.
And it's round, which helps the wind shear, and it's bright red, which helps with visibility. Because there's not a lot of color out there, so something that's colored will really stand out. So I see the red jackets are probably part of that visibility.
Yep.
Yellow Scott tents also helping with visibility, and really everything else is black, white, and gray.
Yeah, you get so used to everything being black and white that you actually start to see other colors in the snow and the volcanic rocks. The black will start to look kind of purple and brown, and the white snow will start to look like it has pastel colors in it, just because your eyes are getting bored and you're trying to invent colors where they might not normally be perceived.
We saw a picture of this hole on social media. What is this? What's this? What is this?
It's a biologist sampling hole. So they would build these shacks on the sea ice and then drill a hole through the ice beneath it. And it was a place where they could grab samples, or they could grab fish or crabs or whatever they were trying to study at the time. And they could also send scuba divers under the ice at these locations to get video of the marine life that lived underneath the sea ice of the ice shelves.
Wow.
Yeah, you see a tiny little jellyfish in this one. That was one of the fun things we got to do. Is they took us out on some excursions to get you away from base. A lot of people, you're out here for 4 to 6 months at a time, and you're working 6 to 7 days a week. So it was really important to have these times to just kind of let loose and meet some other scientists and learn about the other research that was taking place on around the station. So you can see here, that is the remote camp that a biologist or a few biologists were staying at in order to study the Adelie humans. So they were there for quite a while. Another thing to note is, due to the Antarctic Treaty, we're not allowed to leave any signs that you've been there. So when you pack up a camp, everything comes back with you. That includes all of your human waste. Ooh. So there's not a bathroom here. There's a 5-gallon bucket in one of those tents. And you have to store it all, put a lid on it, and bring it back to base with you. So whenever you saw a group coming back in from the field and they're carrying 5-gallon buckets, you knew what they were carrying.
That is, at least it was frozen. And then, so a couple more questions. Well, one was a question about what marine life did you see? Did you see anything in that sampling hole aside from the jellyfish? And then we also have a question about, you might not know, how thick is the ice and how long did it take to drill through? Maybe we'll save that for the drill section, which is coming up. We've got 15 minutes left in our program. And then I saw just on the picture before, you and Kelly were both wearing sunglasses. Katie has a question, is snow blindness a concern when you are out in the field?
Absolutely. They warn you before you go down, pack sunglasses and pack an extra pair. It's very important to wear them anytime you're hanging outside for a long period of time. The light is just being reflected back off of the snow into your face all the time.
And yep, and then we've got some marine life here.
Yeah, so there are no land animals on Antarctica. That was one of the questions we got through email before the talk. So there's no wolves and there's no bears or anything like that down there. The only thing you get are creatures that come out of the ocean. And so we have the seals at Scott Base and we have penguins. You get emperor penguins in Antarctica around Ross Island, but you also get these Adelie penguins, and they're a lot smaller. They're only about 2 to 3 feet tall, and they form their little nests on piles of rocks on bare ground. So they do require bare ground in order to lay their eggs and keep them warm enough. So they are prone to having colony collapse if weather patterns shift, and all of a sudden their rookery that they normally lay their eggs at gets covered in snow.
Wow. And that question had come from Rosalie, and I think we saw Rosalie on here earlier, so thank you very much. And then Hazel had the other question about if there were any wolves there, and so the wolves, no wolves present, no bears present, really just things that come out of the ocean. That's a really good way of describing that.
One of the fun things about observing the penguins is just how they greet each other when one of their mates, when two of the mates are coming near each other, giving each other a rest from the nest, and they just throw their heads back up into the air over and over again in order to say hello. So
Very
that's
cute.
what's happening there. And now these ones are heading out to sea go fishing. We also took some trips in a helicopter. We went to the Antarctic mainland, and we also went down to a glacier. And you can see it's just kind of otherworldly to look down on the ice from a helicopter. The sky and the ice just kind of blend together. Thick chocolate was amazing. So now we're on the mainland of Antarctica, looking back across the sea ice at Mount Erebus. So this is Ross Island, where McMurdo Station is, and that's the active volcano actually gassing off.
That's awesome. Fire and ice all together.
Yep. So yeah, the landscape here was it was quite beautiful. We were there to collect samples, but most of us were collecting pictures first. Skuas are also another animal that you do see down there. So they're basically like giant seagulls, but they're a lot more aggressive. So they'll attack you if you're near near their nest, or if you have any food. I've actually seen them steal a sandwich right out of somebody's hand before.
You're not supposed to go anywhere without food, and so you just got to try to avoid the skuas as best you can.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah, the Barnes Glacier was pretty impressive to see. Just for scale, my mouse cursor is about as tall as a human next to this glacier.
Wow.
So I tried to walk up to it. We all wanted to put our hand on the glacier itself, but none of us could reach over this pile of snow. And so, yeah, it's an enormous structure, and they're extremely important. A lot of scientists study how fast those glaciers are flowing towards the ocean and how fast some of them are retreating. An interesting thing about Antarctica too, we talked about how cold and dry it is, and that basically means it's a giant refrigerator. So if anything does die on the surface of Antarctica, it basically gets mummified. So this desiccated seal carcass right here is from a seal that died at least 50 years beforehand, if not even more. It was probably there when Scott and some of the early explorers were present. Some of the first visitors to McMurdo Station documented the presence of this seal.
Wow, that's incredible.
All right. So we can take questions about life off base, or we can move into ANDRILL. What do you want to do?
Let's move right ahead. So we will have this recording available, and then if people have questions, you can also send them after the program to me. So we'll just get through what we can in the next 15 minutes.
Sounds good. All right. So the ANDRILL project was designed in order to study a period of time 18 million years ago when the world was 2 to 3 degrees warmer than it is today. And the important thing about studying that period of time is that we have a projected 2 to 3 degree global temperature increase over the next 100 years. And a lot of questions will come up about that. It's if the world is 2 to 3 degrees warmer, will these ice shelves still be there? will Antarctica still be covered in ice? And so by looking backwards in time, we can try to answer those questions. Now, I've got 3 little cartoons on this poster on the right-hand side. You can see this is actually a picture of the ANDRILL rig, and it's, I believe this image is used in your exhibit when you're talking about research at the museum. You can see we drilled through about 90 meters of ice shelf, about another couple hundred meters of open ocean, and then we got into the seafloor and drilled a 1,284 meter sediment core. During periods of time when the Ross Ice Shelf was not bare, it means you have plenty of light on the surface of the water, and that allows algae to grow. So if the ice shelf is there, you don't get any algae thriving because it's not getting the sunlight it needs to survive. And so the presence of layers and layers of dead algae tell us that the ice shelf was definitely not there at the time that layer of sediment was deposited.
Oh.
When you get layers of mud, stratified mud that's just kind of laid down over the seafloor, that tells you that the ice shelf probably was present, especially if you see drop rocks. So that's where, as the glacier moved out over the land, it picked up chunks of rock and sediment, and as it's sitting over the water, that stuff starts to settle out onto the ocean floor and get those nice layers of mud and rocks. And then, if there's so much ice present at the time that there's no ocean and it's just a glacier, what you get is really ground down fine sediments and a bunch of angular chunks of rock that have just been ground by that glacier moving across the surface.
So in the, let me just clarify. So in the picture that we're seeing here, with the pipe going all the way down into the sediment layers, this is the time where there is an ice shelf, and you would see the mud because the water is circulating underneath the ice shelf and then bringing mud back across, kind of like the tides wash up on the beach, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then when the ice shelf is not in the way, you think about, oh, when you have the top back on the convertible and there's plenty of light, and then the light lets the algae grow. And then you see lots of algae in layers when the ice shelf was rolled back like a convertible.
Exactly.
And then the last one, let's see if I can get 3 for 3. The last one, when the glacier, so what we see kind of underneath the photos on the side here, if you can point with your cursor.
Sorry, I was circling on the wrong screen.
So if you, up on the top underneath the photos, we've got part of the glacier over the ground. Yeah. And so during a glacial time, that would be all the way across the picture, and that produces jagged rocks because it's cracking and breaking and dragging things along.
Yeah, jagged
Very
rocks.
slowly, very slowly dragging things along.
Exactly.
Very cool. That's awesome.
So that was the point of our project, is we wanted to get that core and get that rock record and read it in order to get the history of this area. So they had to design a special rig for the ANDRILL project. As you can see, unlike a normal drill rig, everything is enclosed, and that's to protect it from the elements. Just like you and I have to wear a coat down there, you had to have a tent that was roped around the rig derrick in order to keep it warm enough that the hydraulics wouldn't freeze up, and also to keep your crew warm enough that they could actually continue to work through these conditions. So this is the crew inside of that tent. Right here, they're unscrewing some of the drill pipe because we needed to change out the drill bit. So just like if you were running a normal bit, like drill at home, if you're grinding away for a long period of time, it's going to get really dull, and so you have to change it periodically. Well, to change ours, we had to pull all of our pipe back out of the hole and change that piece on the end there, which is blades of steel with lab-grown diamonds encrusted inside of it so that it's hard enough to grind the rock down. And you'll see it's hollow in between. That allows the core to come up inside of the drill pipe so that we can retrieve it. After it gets retrieved, they put it into the intake room, and then the scientists measure it. So if you know that you drilled on your rig with 10 feet of pipe, but you only get back 9 feet of core, that means you lost 10% of it down the hole. So you have 90% recovered, and you have to figure out what footages the core that you have actually came from. So you take a log of it. And a geophysical log is basically where you measure the different properties of the rock. So primarily what we're looking for here is how much gamma ray radiation is emitted by the different rocks, the different layers of rock. And that's usually controlled by how much clay you have. So if you take that measurement all along the outside of your core, and then you put a probe down into your drill hole and take that measurement of the inside of your bore hole, then you can match the two together and figure out exactly where the rock came from and which direction it was facing.
That's fascinating. Like using the radioactive signatures to match it like a puzzle piece. And then another question. So in these small buildings, how are these buildings heated? Do they have gas generators or propane tanks, or do you know?
Primarily it was gas generators that would run the base. That's why there were those huge fuel storage tanks back at McMurdo Station. That's a lot of what is powering the base down.
We've got those tank treads on your truck there.
Yep. So after that core had been processed and oriented, that's when my job kicked in. And I would drive out to the site in the mat track. So it's basically a normal pickup truck, but it has tank tire tracks instead of tires. So it was really fun to drive. You can only go about 20 miles an hour. And if you wanted to make a turn in about a quarter of a mile, you had to kind of get started on it. But it was definitely a safe way to get out all the way to the rig and not have to worry about sliding around on the ice. Once I picked up the core, I'd bring it back to McMurdo Station, and that's where we finished processing it. So we had a core splitting shed where some core grad students spent their 4 months, and I would drop off the core with them. They would send it through a large saw, and that would saw it perfectly in half long ways. So then we have two halves of the core. We've got an archive half, which is important to preserve for posterity, and also so you can duplicate any analyses. And then you have a sampling half that you let the scientists actually get to look at. So
because without the archive half, you don't have the reproducibility that is so crucial to science. Otherwise, you're just curious.
Exactly. So you have to be able to reproduce anything, especially if you got some questionable results back on something. It would be sent through another geophysical logger, imaging tools, and a tool that would measure what kinds of minerals were in the rock as well. Then it would get laid out for the scientists so that they could flag what samples they wanted to grab. And they would flag them with these little toothpick flags, and they'd have their initials on it. We would know how much volume each scientist was allotted based on the kind of analysis they were running. And then we would go through and sample the core for them. So we'd print out labels that matched every single sample they had requested, and the rest of my day would be spent going through, and if it was soft sediment, like when we first got into the seafloor, we would just stick a cookie cutter in there and pull out a plug of that mud and stick that in a bag. But once we got deeper and deeper, the rock got harder and harder, and so you got layers of diatomite. That's that layers of algae that tell us the ice shelf wasn't present at the time. And you get layers of mudstone that told us that the ice shelf was present during that time. And it would get so hard, we'd actually have to use a diamond-encrusted blade to saw out the samples after a point. And so you could see there, just bring it down with water just to keep it cool while the saw is running.
Much like a lot of modern masonry, where they use water to cool as they're cutting through materials. I just think that's so fascinating that you can see what was going on with the ice shelf based on the things that had been deposited. And I mean, I don't have a geology background, but I mean, that just seems so, it seems like magic. It's science, but it's so cool that you can just see what's going on. And really, this is getting kind of geeked out at your super cool job, that you read rocks to see what has happened or what is happening, but really more what has happened. You read rocks to see the past. And that's just really cool.
It's a fun part of being a geologist, and definitely a big reason I got into it. A lot of puzzle solving.
Yeah. So that is, as we saw on the very last slide, this beautiful, these photos are so beautiful. We really appreciate you sharing them. Do we have any other questions from people that haven't been answered? We'll just give a few seconds.
If there's no other questions, I did want to skip ahead a little bit. Because a couple of people did send in their questions ahead of time, I wanted to show them a picture of what Antarctica used to look like. So one of those questions they had about, well, how can dinosaurs be here if everything's covered in ice? And that's just what it looks like today. So this is what the present day looks like as far as, North America's over here, then you have South America, then Antarctica, all the way at the pole. But in the past, when dinosaurs were around, the continents were a little bit closer together. Antarctica was actually touching Australia, so it didn't have an ocean all the way around it, and it wasn't frozen over. It was covered in lush forest. And so the dinosaurs were there during the Cretaceous and the Jurassic period. And these are some artist renderings of what Antarctica actually looked like during those periods.
And then also, thank you very much for that question. Those were really excellent questions that were sent in by Rosalie and Hazel. This is my plug for the museum. The Museum of Science is open 7 days a week again, because we have the special exhibit Antarctic Dinosaurs. And not only does it cover some of the sciences that Charlie talked to us about today, but it also recreates these environments where dinosaurs were thriving in a really lush landscape. And so please come and visit it, learn more about the different sciences that are going on still in Antarctica. And science is a long, slow process that needs a lot of repetition in it as well. So if you're thinking about where can I travel, what do I want to study, don't count Antarctica out, because it's really got some promising areas for all sorts of scientists. So geologists, botanists, paleontologists, climatologists, volcanologists, lots of volcanoes there. So there's some really cool stuff there. You can stay up to date with our Conversations in Science series by checking on our website, which is sciencebuff.org. And then also you can always view Conversations in Science recordings, including this one, or maybe you'll find another one after watching the end of this. And that is on our YouTube playlist. And I will put those links in the chat here, as well as a link for feedback, which is extremely important to us. So if you have a few minutes, we'd love to have you do that. And while I'm futzing around with those links, I'll pass it back over to Charlie for a second.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention, Gabrielle was bringing up all the different types of science that you can study down there. But people also go down there to work as science support. So to keep those bases running, it requires carpenters, electricians. You have to have people who know how to fight fires, because that's a really dangerous thing in a dry, windy environment. And janitors and cooks as well. So it really does take an entire community to keep those research bases running.
Seems like a really excellent way to see a very unusual part of the world. So as long as you have your wisdom teeth out and you get your full bill of health with all your explanations of managing your conditions, Antarctica is an awesome way. And they have contractors that set up, and really from all sorts of different countries. So if you find yourself living in another country, going to school, you can ask about their Antarctic research or contractor programs there as well. So I do realize we're just 5 minutes past the hour. This brings us to the official close of our program. We're so glad that you all joined us tonight. We've got some excellent comments in the chat, which I will pass along to Charlie as well. And Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just absolutely over the moon that you were able to come and to share your experience. I thought, oh, I know the perfect person to come in and talk about Antarctica when we brought this, when I first heard the whispers of Antarctic dinosaurs. So maybe if you can come for a visit in Buffalo before September of 2022, you would have a chance to see this exhibit as well.
That actually sounds great. Buffalo in the summertime is something I could deal with.
Yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this program. I had a lot of fun sharing with you. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm sure Dad will be happy to send them along, and I can send you answers.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Joe, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Stop.